I stopped the moment I realized the footsteps behind me weren't my own. Took me longer than it should have to catch on. The sound had been there for a while, echoing through the frozen Niagara section in that particular way sound does down here. Bouncing off limestone walls, traveling through passages carved out over millions of years. Step, echo, step, echo. The rhythm matched mine perfectly, which is why my brain had filed it away as nothing worth noticing. But then I stopped, just froze mid-stride with my left boot hovering above the smooth walkway. The footsteps kept going. 2 more beats before they cut off. My boot came down slow. The rubber sole made no sound against the concrete path. I'd been reaching for my radio when I stopped, some half-formed thought about checking in with Remy about the missing geologist. My hand stayed there, fingers brushing the plastic casing clipped to my belt. Didn't grab it. Didn't move at all. The laminated card in my breast pocket felt heavier than it had any right to. 3 inches by 5 inches of Park Service protocols I'd read maybe a dozen times since Lexi handed it to me at the start of my shift. Anomalous occurrence response guidelines, printed in that official font they use for everything. Step 3. If you observe unexplained phenomena, cease movement and count silently to 60 while maintaining visual awareness of your surroundings. 60 seconds. Hell of a long time to stand still in the dark. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. My flashlight beam cut through the blackness ahead, illuminating the calcite formations that gave this section its name. Frozen Niagara. Flowstone cascading down the chamber wall in ripples and waves, pale orange and cream-colored, looking exactly like a waterfall caught mid-pour and turned to stone. I'd walked past it maybe 1,000 times, given the tour spiel about how each layer represented centuries of mineral deposits, how the iron oxide created those rust-colored streaks. 14, 15, 16. The beam wasn't steady. My hand had developed a tremor I couldn't quite control, making shadows jump and shift across the ancient rock. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. Didn't help. 3 years of night shifts at Mammoth Cave National Park had made me comfortable in the underground darkness. More comfortable than I'd ever been in open spaces, if I'm being honest. Down here, the world had boundaries. Walls you could touch, ceilings mapped and measured. No surprises, just geology doing what geology does. Slow, predictable, patient. 28, 29. I knew this cave, knew the mineral smell of the limestone, that clean, chalky scent that got into your clothes and stayed there no matter how many times you washed them, knew the way temperature gradients created subtle air currents that brushed against exposed skin, knew which chambers carried sound and which ones swallowed it whole. The air sat at 54 degrees year-round, constant, reliable. I felt it now against my face, against the back of my neck where my uniform collar didn't quite reach. 41, 42. But tonight, everything felt wrong. I couldn't pin it down exactly. Couldn't point to one specific thing and say, that's what's different. The wrongness came from everywhere at once. The air pressure seemed heavier, pressing down on my shoulders, making each breath require conscious effort. My ears kept trying to pop even though I hadn't changed elevation. 53, 54. The usual cave sounds had disappeared. No drip of water from the ceiling joints. No rustle of air moving through distant passages. No settling creaks from the old wooden handrails along the tourist path. Just silence. Complete silence. The kind that shouldn't exist in a living cave system. It pressed against my eardrums. An actual physical sensation, like being underwater without the wet. My pulse hammered loud enough that I could hear it, or maybe feel it. I couldn't tell which. The blood moving through my head became the only sound in the world. 59. 60. I'd finished counting. Protocol said to proceed with caution and report observations at next check-in. I didn't move. My flashlight beam still trembled against the flowstone. The formations looked different somehow. Wrong angles, wrong shadows. I'd photographed this exact section for the Park Service website last month, knew every ridge and hollow, but now the familiar shape seemed off by degrees I couldn't measure. Something had walked behind me in this cave, matched my pace step for step until I stopped, and now the silence sat heavy and patient, waiting to see what I'd do next. Lexi caught me in the equipment room an hour before my shift started. I was checking my spare batteries, running through the usual prep, when she appeared in the doorway without making a sound, didn't knock, just stood there until I looked up. "Need to talk to you," she said. Her voice had that careful flatness she used when something was wrong, but she didn't want to spook anyone. I'd heard it twice before. Once when a tourist had a heart attack on the Grand Avenue tour, once when a sinkhole opened up near the historic entrance, and we had to reroute everything for a week. I set down the battery pack. "What's going on?" She glanced behind her into the hallway, then stepped inside and pulled the door mostly closed, left it open maybe 3 inches. The overhead fluorescent made her face look older than usual, deepened the lines around her mouth. "Albert Hernandez is missing." Took me a second to place the name. "The geologist? University of Kentucky guy?" "That's him." She folded her arms across her chest, then unfolded them. Her fingers went to the watch band on her left wrist, twisted it halfway around. He had permission to survey the mapped sections near Cleveland Avenue. That was it. Just Cleveland. I waited. "Found his vehicle in the lot this morning. Been there since Wednesday night." She paused. "Today's Friday." 2 days. Nobody stays underground for 2 days, not on a single-day permit. Not without checking in. "He go off route?" Lexi's jaw tightened. "We think he accessed one of the unauthorized passages, near the old exploratory tunnels past Bottomless Pit. The park had miles of unmapped cave, passages that didn't make it onto the tour routes, sections too unstable or too dangerous, or just too far off the main network to bother with. We had them flagged in the system, marked with orange tape and warning signs. Anyone with proper credentials knew to stay clear unless they had specific authorization and a safety team. He go in alone? Yes. Stupid. That was just stupid. First rule of cave work. Never solo in unmapped territory. Lexi reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out a laminated card. 3 by 5 inches, the kind we used for emergency contact information. She held it between both hands for a moment, thumb rubbing across the plastic surface. "There's protocols," she said, "for certain sections of the cave." Her hands weren't steady. I'd known Lexi for 3 years, worked under her supervision on everything from routine maintenance to actual emergencies, and I'd never seen her hands shake. She stepped closer and pressed the card into my palm. Her fingers were cold. "These date back a long time, before I started here, before the superintendent before me started here." She released the card but didn't step back. "You follow them exactly. Don't improvise, don't second guess, just follow them." I looked down at the card. The text was printed in small block letters, single-spaced, numbered 1 through 8. The lamination was yellowed at the edges, scratched from years of handling. "What is this?" "Rules." She finally stepped back, put her hand on the doorframe. "For working night shifts in the deeper sections." I scanned the first few lines. "Never speak aloud in Echo River Passage after midnight. Don't photograph any formation that appears to have moved since your last observation. Avoid the unmarked passage 17 feet northeast of Bottomless Pit overlook." This some kind of hazing thing? The words came out before I could stop them. I looked up, half expecting Lexi to crack a smile, admit this was some elaborate prank the senior rangers pulled on everyone eventually. Her expression didn't change. "It's not hazing, Herman." The way she said it killed any thought of joking. She wasn't annoyed or defensive. She was just stating a fact, flat and final. I went back to the card. Rule 4. If you hear your name called from an unexplored passage, do not respond and do not investigate. Rule 5. Mark your path at every intersection and verify marks are unchanged when you return. Rule 6 was underlined. Twice. Heavy black ink that had bled slightly into the lamination. If your flashlight reveals a figure that casts no shadow, immediately close your eyes and do not open them until you hear running water. I read it 3 times. Lexi, what the hell is this? Protocols. She checked her watch. That old silver one she wore every shift. You're assigned to Frozen Niagara and the connecting passages tonight. Hernandez was last logged near that section on Wednesday. You see any sign of him? Equipment, markers, anything, you radio immediately. And these rules, you follow them. She met my eyes. Exactly as written, you understand? I didn't understand a damn thing. But her hands were still trembling, and there was something in her face that made my chest feel tight. Yeah, I understand. She nodded once and left. Didn't say anything else, just walked out and pulled the door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood there holding the laminated card, reading through the rules again. They read like folklore, like those stories teenagers tell each other on camping trips, trying to see who scares first. The kind of stuff you laugh about later. I folded the card and slipped it into my breast pocket. Finished checking my batteries, clipped the radio to my belt, grabbed my pack, and headed for the cave entrance. Figured I'd humor her. Lexi had her reasons for everything, even if they didn't always make immediate sense. Maybe it was some old Park Service tradition, some way of keeping rangers alert during solo night shifts. Follow the spooky rules, stay focused, don't get complacent. That was before I found the pack. 3 hours into my shift, I was doing a routine sweep of the Frozen Niagara section. Just visual checks, looking for trip hazards or handrail damage, making sure nothing had changed since the last tour group came through that afternoon. Standard stuff. The pack was sitting against the wall maybe 15 feet from the main viewing platform, dark blue canvas, medium-sized hiking style with padded straps. Wasn't there on the last inspection log. I checked the notes before starting my route. I approached it slowly, flashlight beam steady on the fabric. No movement, no sound except my boots on the concrete path. It was open, top flap folded back, main compartment unzipped. I crouched down beside it, careful not to touch anything yet. Played the light across the contents. 2 water bottles, both still sealed, full. A rolled-up topographic map with the Park Service logo visible on the edge. A yellow field notebook with a rubber band around it. Granola bar, and a sandwich in a clear plastic container, the kind with the snap-lock corners. The sandwich had 1 bite taken out of it. Roast beef, maybe. Lettuce. The edges of the bread were starting to curl. Nobody leaves their supplies behind underground. That's basic. Your water, your food, your light sources, those stay with you every single second. You don't set down your pack and wander off. You don't leave it behind to come back later. Not in a cave. Not ever. I pulled my radio from my belt, pressed the transmit button. Base, this is Hansen. You copy? Static. Just white noise hissing from the speaker. I tried again. Base, this is Hansen at Frozen Niagara. Found some abandoned equipment. Need to report. More static. Louder this time with a weird rhythmic pulse underneath. Almost sounded like breathing. I checked the radio settings. Everything looked normal. Channel 3, same as always. Volume at 70%. Battery indicator showing full charge. Lexi, you there? This is Herman. I've got... The static cut out completely. Dead air. Not even the usual carrier hum. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. Moving at the same pace I'd been walking 30 seconds earlier. Before I stopped to examine the pack. That was when I understood the rules weren't folklore at all. I started walking again. My legs felt wooden, mechanical. Left foot, right foot. The count had finished, and protocol said proceed with caution, so I proceeded. The footsteps behind me resumed immediately, matching my pace exactly. Boot sole on concrete, half a second pause, another boot sole on concrete. Mine and the echo. That wasn't an echo. I kept my breathing steady. Didn't speed up, didn't slow down. Just maintained that same measured pace I'd been using for the last 3 hours. The one that ate up ground without wasting energy. The one I'd learned doing night patrols in passages that stretched for miles. The barrier came up on my right. Waist-high metal rail with a faded red sign. Authorized personnel only beyond this point. I ducked under it without stopping. The walkway ended 5 feet later. Concrete gave way to uneven limestone. The tourist path replaced by raw cave floor that required actual attention. I'd been in these sections before. Maintenance checks, geological surveys, that photo documentation project last spring. Knew them well enough in theory. Never at night. Never alone. Never with something walking behind me that stopped when I stopped. The electric lights ended at the barrier. One moment I had that dim amber glow the Park Service installed back in the 90s. Next moment, just the beam from my flashlight cutting through darkness so complete it felt solid. The kind of dark you don't get anywhere on the surface. The kind that presses against your eyes even when they're open. My flashlight carved out a circle maybe 15 feet across. Everything beyond that didn't exist. I swept the beam left, then right, mapping the passage ahead. The formations rose up out of nothing, pale columns of flowstone, clusters of stalactites hanging from ceiling I couldn't see, stalagmites reaching up to meet them, frozen stone waterfalls caught mid-pour. Something was wrong with them. I'd documented this section, measured it, photographed it, written descriptions for the geological survey team. Knew every major formation, every significant feature. The massive column we called Giant's Leg stood 30 feet ahead on the left. The twin flowstone cascades nicknamed Sisters bracketed the passage another 20 feet beyond that. They were all there, all in the right positions, but they looked wrong. I stopped walking. The footsteps behind me continued for 2 beats, same as before, then cut off. My beam held steady on Giant's Leg. 50,000 years of calcium carbonate deposits, 12 feet tall and maybe 4 feet across at the widest point, cream-colored with those characteristic rust streaks where iron oxide leached through. I'd spent 40 minutes photographing it from 8 different angles. The stalactites above it were leaning, not much. Maybe 5 degrees off vertical. But stalactites don't lean. They grow straight down, pulled by gravity, dripping calcite following the same path for centuries. Physics doesn't allow for angles. I moved the beam. The sisters came into view, those twin flowstone formations with their rippled surfaces catching the light. They glistened. Not the dull matte finish of dry calcite, actual wetness, like they were actively flowing, like water was running over them right now. The cave was 54 degrees year-round. Humidity ran around 90%. The formation stayed damp sometimes, sure, but this was different. This was slick, wet enough to reflect my flashlight beam in streaks and pools. I checked my watch, 3:42 in the morning. My hand was shaking hard enough that the numbers blurred. Keep moving. That's what the protocol said. Proceed with caution, maintain visual awareness, report at next check-in. I started walking again. Picked my way over the uneven floor, boots finding purchase on stone worn smooth by ancient water flow. The passage narrowed ahead, ceiling dropping from maybe 20 feet to 8 or 9. My flashlight beam swept across formations that all looked slightly wrong. Angles that shouldn't exist. Surfaces too wet or too dry. Shadows falling in directions that didn't match my light source. The footsteps kept pace behind me, steady, relentless, same rhythm as mine. Then I heard my name. Herman. It came from my left, a side passage I'd marked on survey maps as Unexplored Junction 7, 30 feet deep, dead-ended in a collapse not worth full documentation. The voice drifted out of that darkness like smoke. My mother's voice. Not similar to it. Not reminiscent of it. Her voice exactly. The same slight hoarseness she'd developed the last 2 years. The same Kentucky Hills accent she'd never lost despite 40 years in Bowling Green. The way she'd said my name 10,000 times. Herman, dinner's ready. Herman, your father called. Herman, the doctor wants to see us again. I stopped walking. Couldn't help it. The footsteps behind me continued for 2 beats, then stopped. Herman, honey. My hands locked on the flashlight. The beam jerked right away from the passage, throwing wild shadows across the main tunnel. My breath came short and fast. Dawn Hansen had died 6 years ago last March. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. I'd held her hand in the hospice room while she slipped away, felt her pulse fade under my fingers, watched her chest stop moving. Herman, I need you to come here. The same tone she'd used when I was 12, and she'd found me in the backyard at midnight, looking for the dog that had run off. Patient, concerned, that specific combination of worry and relief. My throat tried to respond, tried to shape words. Mom? Is that? I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste copper. Rule 5. If you hear your name called from unexplored passages, do not respond or investigate. I pulled the laminated card from my breast pocket, had to switch the flashlight to my left hand, and the beam went everywhere except where I needed it. Finally got the card up where I could read it. Rule 5, underlined once. If you hear your name called from unexplored passages, do not respond or investigate. Herman, please, I'm lost. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the card. I shoved it back in my pocket, got both hands on the flashlight again. The beam steadied slightly. Not much. Enough. I started walking. Forward. Deeper into the passage. Away from unexplored Junction 7. Away from my mother's voice calling from the darkness. Herman, don't leave me here. I kept walking, focused on my boots, on the stone under them, on maintaining that steady pace. Left foot, right foot. The footsteps behind me resumed their rhythm. Herman! Louder now. Not angry, frightened. The way she'd sounded, that night. Dad didn't come home from his shift. The night before we found out about the accident. Raw fear and desperate need. I didn't respond, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge it. The passage curved right. I followed it, putting stone between me and that side junction. My jaw ached from clenching. Sweat ran down my spine despite the constant 54 degrees. Herman, please. I'm scared. The voice faded as I moved deeper, not cutting off suddenly, just growing distant. The way sound actually travels in caves, diminishing with space and stone. I kept walking. The formations pressed in on both sides now, narrowing the passage to maybe 4 feet across. My flashlight beam showed more wrongness ahead, stalactites that curved like reaching fingers, flowstone that seemed to pulse in the shifting light. Behind me, the footsteps matched my pace. And farther back, growing fainter with each step I took, my mother's voice called my name into darkness that swallowed the sound completely. I didn't stop, didn't respond, didn't acknowledge what I'd heard. I just kept walking forward into the cave. The passage widened after another 100 feet or so, opening into a chamber I recognized from survey maps as the approach to bottomless pit. My flashlight swept across familiar formations. The leaning tower on my left, cathedral spires clustered on my right, everything in its proper place. The footsteps behind me maintained their rhythm. I'd stopped hearing my mother's voice maybe 10 minutes back. The silence had returned, that same heavy pressure pushing against my eardrums, just my boots on stone and the matching footsteps following at that precise half-second delay. The bottomless pit barrier came into view, another waist-high rail with warning signs about the 105-foot drop. I'd been down there once on rappel for a structural assessment. Nothing at the bottom but breakdown boulders and standing water. I stopped 6 feet from the barrier. The footsteps continued. 2 beats, stopped. My hands had stopped shaking somewhere back in the narrow passage. Funny what you get used to. Terror wears grooves in you, finds its level. I was breathing steady, pulse elevated but controlled. Just another night shift in Mammoth Cave. The unmarked passage was supposed to be 17 feet northeast of the overlook. Rule number 3 on Lexi's card. I pulled out my compass, watched the needle settle, and traced the angle with my flashlight beam. There. A crack in the limestone, maybe 3 feet wide at the base, tapering as it rose. I'd walked past this section during last spring's photo project and never noticed it. The kind of feature that shouldn't exist. My eyes wanted to slide right over it, focus on anything else. I approached slow, keeping my flashlight trained on the opening. Cold air exhaled from the crack. Not the cave's normal 54 degrees. This was colder, the kind of chill that came from deep earth, where the temperature dropped with every 100 feet of depth. It hit my face, and I tasted copper on the back of my tongue. Pennies left in your mouth too long. And underneath that, something organic. Not decay exactly. Something living, but wrong. The smell of an infected wound before you clean it. I stopped at the crack's entrance, played my light across the interior. The passage extended back farther than my beam could reach, narrow walls pressing close. Flowstone formations caught the light, wet, glistening. Wrong angles again. Stalactites that curved when they should have hung straight. And there, maybe 5 feet inside, a dark blue shape against the pale limestone. Hernandez's notebook. Same yellow field notebook I'd seen in his pack back at frozen Niagara. But the rubber band was gone. The notebook lay open. Pages spread against the cave floor. I glanced behind me. Nothing but darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. The footsteps had stopped when I stopped. Everything waited. The protocol card didn't say anything about unmarked passages, just told me to avoid them. But Hernandez had been in there, and Lexi needed to know what happened to him. I edged into the crack sideways, pack scraping against limestone. The cold intensified, raising goose flesh on my arms under the uniform sleeves. That copper and rot smell got stronger. 3 steps brought me to the notebook. I crouched, knees protesting, and picked it up with my free hand. The pages were covered in sketches, frantic pencil work, lines gouged deep enough to tear through in places. I recognized Hernandez's handwriting from requisition forms, same tight, cramped letters, but the usual precision was gone. These notes sprawled and jumped, words running together. The sketches showed something tall, thin. I tilted the notebook, trying to make sense of the proportions. Human-shaped, maybe, but the limbs had too many joints. Elbows where there shouldn't be elbows. Knees that bent backward. The figure appeared on page after page, drawn from different angles, with measurements and annotations crowding the margins. Observes but does not approach, one note read. Matches movement. Stops when I stop. No sound from it, none, not breathing, not footsteps. My throat went dry. I flipped forward. The handwriting deteriorated, letters getting bigger and more erratic. Whole words scratched out, rewritten, scratched out, again. It's following me deeper. Can't find the main passage. Marks I left are gone. Radio dead. Batteries fresh but completely dead. The final entry took up an entire page, written in letters nearly an inch tall. It doesn't move when you watch it, only when you look away. Underneath, smaller. Don't blink. My hands started shaking again. I closed the notebook, shoved it into my jacket pocket, and backed out of the crack. The limestone scraped my shoulders. That cold air followed me out, carrying its copper rot smell. I emerged into the main chamber and turned back toward the passage I'd come from. My flashlight caught movement 30 feet down, back the way I'd walked. I froze, beam steady on the figure standing motionless in the center of the passage. Ranger uniform, khaki shirt and pants, dark boots, radio clipped to the belt. Flashlight in the right hand, beam pointed at the ground. The figure had my face. Not similar. Not close. Exactly my face. Sandy brown hair cut to the same length I'd trimmed it last week. Same narrow features, same cheekbones, same height and build. Even the same crow's feet at the corners of its eyes. It stood completely still. Didn't breathe. Didn't shift its weight. Didn't blink. A photograph of me standing upright in the dark. I angled my light, directing the beam past the figure's shoulder. The cave wall behind it caught the light. Pale limestone, iron oxide streaks, moisture glistening on flowstone formations. No shadow. The figure cast no shadow on the wall. My light hit it square, should have thrown a clear silhouette on the rock behind, but there was nothing. Just the figure standing in my beam, absorbing the light, casting nothing back. Rule 6 burned in my memory. If your flashlight reveals a figure casting no shadow, immediately close your eyes and keep them closed until you hear running water. But I couldn't close my eyes, couldn't look away, because Hernandez's final note was screaming in my head. It doesn't move when you watch it, only when you look away. Blood ran cold in my veins. Actual physical sensation, like ice water replacing what should have been warm. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my breathing had gone shallow. Quiet. The thing wearing my face stood motionless 30 feet down the passage, blocking the path back to frozen Niagara, back to the main cave, back to the surface. I stared at it. It stared back with my own hazel eyes, and I understood with absolute certainty that the moment I stopped watching, it would move. I shut my eyes. The rule card had said immediately, and I'd wasted maybe 3 seconds staring at that thing wearing my face before my brain caught up. My eyelids came down, and the darkness behind them felt different from the cave darkness. Warmer, safer, wrong in a better way. Rule 6. Close your eyes and keep them closed until you hear running water. I stood there with my eyes squeezed shut and my flashlight still gripped in my right hand, beam pointed somewhere toward the cave floor. My left hand had gone to my chest, pressing against the breast pocket where the laminated card sat. My pulse hammered against my palm through the fabric. I strained to hear water, any water, dripping, trickling, the slow seep-through limestone that made the formations grow. The cave had been silent before, that wrong, pressed-down silence that started back in frozen Niagara. But now I needed sound. Needed it the way I'd needed air that time in the crawl space past Gothic Avenue, when my pack got wedged and I couldn't move forward or back for maybe 20 seconds that felt like 20 minutes. Nothing. Just silence pressing against my eardrums. My breathing sounded too loud. Each inhale scraped down my throat. Each exhale came back at me from the cave walls, or maybe from something standing 30 feet away that didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't cast a shadow when light hit it straight on. I kept my eyes closed. The darkness behind my eyelids started doing that thing where you see shapes that aren't there. Phosphenes, the Park Service medical training called them. Little bursts of color and light from your optic nerve firing random signals. I saw green spirals, orange dots, a white flash that looked almost like a face. I kept my eyes closed. My legs wanted to move, back away from where I'd seen the figure, or forward past it, or sideways into the unmarked passage where I'd found Hernandez's notebook, anywhere but standing still. But I didn't know where it was now. Didn't know if it had moved the moment my eyes shut. Could be anywhere. Could be right in front of me. The silence stretched out. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not the matched pace rhythm from before, not the half-second delay that had followed me from frozen Niagara through the passages. These were different, measured, coming closer. Boot strikes on limestone, each one distinct and separate. The sound came from directly ahead, from where the figure had been standing. I kept my eyes closed and my flashlight pointed down, and my breathing as quiet as I could manage. The footsteps continued. 5 strikes. 6. 7. Getting closer. Then my own voice said, "Why won't you look?" My jaw clenched hard enough to make my teeth ache. The voice came from maybe 15 feet away, maybe less. Same tone I used for radio checks. Same slight Kentucky accent that got stronger when I was tired. Same everything. "It'll be quick," the voice said. My voice. "I promise." The footsteps kept coming. 8, 9, 10. I wanted to open my eyes. The urge hit me like a physical thing, an itch behind my eyelids that built with each passing second. Every instinct screamed that I needed to see, needed to know where it was, needed to watch it, because Hernandez's note had said it only moved when you looked away, and I wasn't looking, and I kept my eyes closed. The footsteps came closer. 11, 12. I tried counting them to keep my mind on something concrete, something I could measure and track. Tried to estimate distance. Each boot strike maybe 2 feet of forward movement. 30 feet to start. 12 steps would be 24 feet. It was 6 feet away. 13, 14, 4 feet. I still couldn't hear water. The cave gave me nothing but those approaching footsteps and that voice wearing my accent, my tone, my vocal cords wrapped around words I hadn't spoken. 15. The footsteps stopped. My heart slammed against my ribs hard enough that I felt it in my throat. I stood there with my eyes closed and my flashlight pointed at the ground, and my left hand pressed against my chest, and tried not to think about how close it was. Tried not to picture it standing right in front of me, that figure with my face and my uniform and no shadow, close enough to touch. Something moved in the air near my face. A displacement, a shift in pressure, the way the air feels when someone leans in close. Then I felt breath on my skin, cold, stale, like air from a passage that hadn't had circulation in decades, that had been sitting still and growing old in the dark. It washed across my face from my forehead down to my chin, steady and rhythmic. In and out, in and out. But the thing in front of me didn't breathe. Hernandez's notes had said so. No sound from it, none. Not breathing, not footsteps. I was hearing footsteps, feeling breath. It was using my own sounds against me, my own breathing pattern, the rhythm I'd established walking through the passages for the last 3 hours. The breath came again, cold against my closed eyelids, inches away, close enough that if I reached out, I'd touch it, close enough that it could reach out and touch me. I kept my eyes closed and listened for water and heard nothing but that terrible, steady breathing that shouldn't exist. My hand tightened on the flashlight grip. The metal dug into my palm. I focused on that. The physical sensation, the realness of it. Standard Park Service 6-cell Maglite, 2 pounds of aluminum and batteries and bulb. I'd replaced the batteries at the start of shift, checked the beam twice. The breathing continued. Then, under it, behind it, so faint I almost missed it, I caught something else. Water, distant, barely audible. A trickling sound somewhere to my right. Thin and steady. Not the heavy flow of an underground stream, just a trickle. Could be condensation running down a wall. Could be a small seep. Could be Echo River, which ran through the lower passages and came close to this section near the junction with the historic route. I held still and listened harder, trying to separate that tiny water sound from the breathing in my face. There, to my right, maybe 20 feet away, maybe more. Definitely water moving over stone. The rule had said keep your eyes closed until you hear running water. It hadn't said anything about what to do after that. Hadn't given me next steps, but I knew the cave. Knew that if Echo River was to my right, the historic entrance was upstream. Knew the passages well enough that I could navigate them in the dark if I had to. Had done it before during a power outage 2 years back when the generator failed and all the electric lights went out at once. I'd never done it with my eyes deliberately closed. Never done it with something breathing on my face that shouldn't be breathing at all. I took a step to the right. My boot came down on uneven limestone. I kept my eyes closed and my flashlight pointed down and took another step, angling toward where I'd heard the water. The breathing followed me. I heard it move through the air beside my head, maintaining that same close distance. But the footsteps didn't resume. Whatever it was, however it was moving, it did it silently now. Just that cold, stale breath tracking me through the dark. I took another step and my knuckles scraped against limestone on my right side, the passage wall. I used it as a guide, keeping my hand against the stone and shuffling forward with small, careful steps. My left boot hit a raised formation, and I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. The breathing stayed with me, close enough to feel, close enough that the coldness of it made my skin prickle. I kept moving toward the water sound. It grew slightly louder, still faint, still easy to miss under the breathing and my own footfalls, but definitely getting closer. My hand scraped over rough calcite formations. Flowstone, probably. The kind that built up in layers over centuries. Sharp enough to tear skin if you weren't careful. Something caught my boot and I went down hard on one knee. The impact jolted through my leg. I kept my eyes closed and pushed myself back upright, using the wall for support. The flashlight beam swung wild. I felt the weight shift in my hand, but I didn't open my eyes to see where it pointed. The breathing moved around to my other side now. I felt it near my left ear. Still that same cold staleness. I kept going. The water sound grew louder. Definitely Echo River. I recognized the particular echo pattern it made in the lower passages, the way the sound bounced off formations and came back layered and complex. My right hand scraped over a sharp edge and I felt skin tear. Warm blood welled up across my palm. I didn't stop, just kept my bleeding hand against the stone and kept shuffling forward with my eyes closed. The breathing stayed with me, but the footsteps never came back. Whatever it was, it moved like smoke now, like air itself. Just that cold breath tracking me step by step through the passage. The water sound built until I could hear it echo off the walls, loud enough that it filled the space around me, loud enough that the rules condition was met. I'd heard running water, could open my eyes now if I wanted. I opened them. The flashlight beam showed rough limestone walls close on both sides. Formations I didn't recognize. I'd come maybe 40 feet with my eyes closed, navigating blind. And I had no idea exactly where I was anymore. But the water sound came from directly ahead, and when I moved forward 3 more steps, I saw it, Echo River, running dark and cold through a channel it had cut over millennia. I ran. Didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just moved. My boots pounded against stone and I followed the river upstream, keeping it on my left. The flashlight beam bounced wild as I ran, showing formations and walls and ceiling in stuttering flashes. Behind me, nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the sound of water and my own ragged gasps and my boots striking limestone. I didn't look back. The river led me through passages I half recognized, past formations that showed up in fragments in my flashlight beam. The cave opened up around me, and I kept running, following the water because it flowed from the historic entrance direction, because I knew this route, because stopping meant thinking about what had just been inches from my face. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook and the passage ahead started looking familiar in a real way, not just a maybe I've been here way. Ran until I saw electric lights in the distance, the amber glow of the tourist route. I didn't look back, didn't slow down, just kept the river on my left and followed it toward the entrance, toward the surface, toward air that hadn't been underground for 600 million years. Kept running and didn't look back. The historic entrance materialized out of darkness 30 minutes into my run. Pale gray light filtered down through the opening. Early morning dawn cutting through the black like a blade. I climbed the final slope on hands and knees, flashlight abandoned somewhere in the last quarter mile when the battery finally died. My right palm left blood smears on the limestone. The cut from that sharp edge wasn't deep, but it wouldn't stop bleeding. Lexi stood at the top, waiting for me. She wasn't alone. Remy and Audrey flanked her on either side, both in full gear with packs and coiled rope. Behind them, 6 more rangers I recognized from day shift stood in a loose semicircle. Search and rescue configuration. They'd been preparing to come down after me. I pulled myself over the threshold and onto the concrete pad just inside the entrance building. My legs gave out. I sat there breathing hard, tasting copper and limestone dust. Lexi crouched down in front of me. She didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask what happened. She just looked at me with those dark brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and waited. I found... My voice came out rough, barely recognizable. I found Hernandez's notebook in the unmarked passage, the one 17 feet northeast of Bottomless Pit. Remy shifted his weight. Audrey's hand moved to her radio, then stopped. There was something down there. I pulled the blue field notebook from my jacket pocket. The pages were bent from being shoved in there during my stumble. It wore my face. It didn't cast a shadow. It followed me, and I closed my eyes, and I heard water, and I ran. The words tumbled out fragmented and disordered. Not how I'd normally report. Not how I'd been trained. Lexi reached out slowly and took the notebook from my hand. She opened it to the first page with Hernandez's sketches, the tall figure with too many joints. She flipped through without expression, stopped at the final entry in those inch-tall letters. She closed the notebook. "Audrey, get the first aid kit," she said quietly. "Remy, stand down the..."